Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and Chag Sameach. Elias, Dan, and I are recording this in our beloved Rabbi Samuel Chill Sanctuary on Wednesday morning, April the 16th. It is the second day of Chol Moed Pesach. This is showing on the seventh day of Pesach. And colleagues, I'm very excited for our class today because there is a riddle wrapped in a conundrum that's at the heart of our class. The seventh day of Pesach, this Shabbos, the 19th, according to tradition, is the day that God split the Sea of Reeds. Kriyat Yam Suf happened on day 7, according to tradition. And so it is the day that Moses sings the song, Az Yashir Moshe Ovnei Israel. The Shirah happened on the seventh day of Pesach. And so our beloved rabbinic tradition was trying to find a haftarah that could be a good companion piece for the seventh day of Pesach. So the seventh day Torah reading is Moses singing a song of love and gratitude and joy to God because God saved Moses and the Israelites in Moses' time. And so the rabbis paired that with King David. And King David in the book of Tehillim, chapter 22, King David offers a psalm, a song of God, a poem of gratitude. God, thank you so much for saving me, King David. You just saved me. When I cried out to you, you answered my prayer. It's a psalm and a song of gratitude. So from the rabbinic tradition, it was a nice parallel. Moses's psalm of gratitude, Az Yashir, is met with the complementary King David song of gratitude. But there is one big problem, which is King David's song of gratitude, Psalm 22, contains a big, fat lie. There is just an egregious and outrageous and easily demonstrable lie at the heart of King David's words of love and gratitude. And this is not, do you read, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times? Do you watch Fox News or MSNBC? This is the Bible itself. The Bible itself would undermine what David says as a big, fat lie. And so the question is, why does this psalm of gratitude contain a big fat lie? The psalms are supposed to be religious poetry. They're supposed to be uplifting. They're supposed to be inspiring. They're supposed to inspire us to lead ethical lives. What kind of inspiration is it when our psalms contain a big fat lie? And what's the lesson is it teaching us? And why is it that the rabbinic tradition saw fit to put this as the haftarah? Pick another haftarah, pick another theme, pick something else that doesn't get besmirched with a lie. And to make that matter worse, we read this haftarah not once but twice. We read it on the seventh day of Pesach. We also read it on the Shabbat when we read Ha'azinu in later Deuteronomy. So it's a conundrum. And we'll look forward to unpacking it as we thank God for the gift of learning Torah together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. V'arev na Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'b'fi amcha be'Yisrael, v'nihiyah anachnu v'tzatza'enu v'tzatza'ei amcha be'Yisrael, kulanu yodei shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma, Baruch atah Adonai hamelamed Torah la'amo Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, natan lanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. So this haftarah of King David's is not short. It's 51 verses, and maybe it gets saved from the lie that's in the middle of it by its very length, which discourages serious examination of it. But what I want to do is just begin with the beginning and the end, which are lovely. They're, God, thank you for saving me. And then we'll just look at that. And if that was what we had, it would be lovely and it would be a perfect companion piece to Moses's Az Yashir. But then we'll look at the middle. So, Elias, you want to just read on page 1 of the handout in English. This is the beginning of the haftarah where David thanks God.
David addressed the words of this song to the Lord after the Lord had saved him from the hands of all his enemies and from the hands of Saul. He said, O Lord, my crag, my fastness, my deliverer. O God, the rock wherein I take shelter, my shield, my mighty companion, my mighty champion, my fortress and refuge, my Savior, you who rescued me from violence. All praise I call on the Lord, and I was delivered from my enemies.
Okay, so that's the basic idea. Was God, thank you. You saved me. You delivered me. I called out to you, and you answered. And that feels like a good piece in companionship to the Az Yashir Moshe, the Psalm at the Sea. And then at the end, Dan, just if you might read on page 4 at the very end, the Lord lives, on this page 4 of the handout.
The Lord lives. Blessed is my rock. Exalted be God, the rock who gives my victory, the God who has vindicated me and made peoples subject to me, rescued me from my enemies, raised me clear of my foes, saved me from lawless men. For this I sing your praise among the nations, and hymn your name. Tower victory to his king, who deals graciously with his anointed, with David and his offspring evermore.
Okay, so far so good. It begins and it ends in a lovely, clear, strong way. And it's a simple point. God, you saved me. Thank you. God, you saved me. Thank you. Okay, now comes the problematic part. And I will read this. We're on page 2 of the handout. This is 2 Samuel chapter 22, verses 21 through 28. And you consider this yourself on the merits. The Lord rewarded me according to my merit. He requited the cleanness of my hands. For I, David, have kept the ways of the Lord and have not been guilty before my God. I am mindful of all his rules and have not departed from his laws. I have been blameless before him, and have guarded myself from sinning. And the Lord has requited my merit according to my purity in his sight. With the loyal you deal loyally, with the blameless hero blamelessly, with the pure you act in purity, and with the perverse you are wily. To humble folks you give victory, and you look with scorn on the haughty. Okay, so that's David in the middle of this psalm of gratitude, saying that I, David, earn all these victories because I was clean and pure and observed all of God's laws. Elias and Dan, what comes up for you when you read David's self-assessment? And what comes up for you when you hear it, when you read it?
Well, I start with what you said before we started.
So a couple of things that jump up here from the Haftorah. As you read then in English at the end of the Haftorah ends, we all know this, Migdol Yeshuot Malko ve'oseh chesed lemshichol leDavid u'lezaro ad olam. We recite that every day when we do Birkat Hamazon. So it's not only that this is included twice a year in the Haftarah, but also the end of the Shirat, we apply it to every time we thank God for the meal. So if you look at this poetry, this hymn or psalm of King David, it's lovely. I love it. It's beautiful. It gives you optimism. It gives you that, the idea that if you do well, even when you struggle in life, that at the end you can have, fruits of your labor. And I like it. It's inspiring. That is the reason it's called Shirat David. All right. Now,
but what about?
I know.
I'm
that,
jumping out of my
okay,
skin here, Elias.
So I know
he's a big fat liar.
Okay, I know that
he's a big fat liar. So we just can't elide that.
I want to say something, and then
he's a big fat liar, and deal with that.
Okay. So I was reading a commentary by Isaac Abarbanel, the great Portuguese Sephardic Torah commentator in the 1400s. He says that he strongly believed at the time that we cannot take the book of Samuel chronologically. He strongly believed that David wrote this in his youth, before the episode with Batsheba and Uriah. How you say it? Uriah.
Yeah.
All right. So basically,
so let me just tell our listeners who are not familiar with the story, there's at least 3 big sins that David commits that the Bible itself says he committed. Number 1, he commits the sin of adultery. He sleeps with Batsheba, who is a married woman. Number two, he commits the sin of murder because he tries to he sleeps with Batsheba. She gets pregnant. David infamously calls Uriah to come home so that Uriah would have sex with his wife so that he would think that the baby is his. But Uriah is such a man of honor, he won't sleep with his wife and enjoy the comforts of home when his fellow soldiers are in harm's way. So he won't even go home to enjoy domestic bliss. And in the end, King David writes out a message, an executive order, saying to Joab, the general, saying, put Uriah in harm's way, put him at the fiercest part of the battle, and then fall back so that he dies in battle. And he writes that, and Uriah is so trusting of King David that he actually carries his own death warrant. And he gets told, and so all that is not MSNBC, Fox News. That's in the Bible. And then God sends a prophet, Nathan, and Nathan chastises him and says, you stole somebody else's wife, and therefore you are going to get punished. And you put, and Nathan says this. So let's just read this. The story that, so by the way, let me just read what David, the executive order of King David. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab, his general, which he sent with Uriah. Uriah carries this. He wrote in the letter as follows: place Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then fall back so that he may be killed. Signed, King David. And Uriah actually carries that, and Joab carries it out. And then it writes, the men of the city sallied out and attacked Joab, and some of David's officers among the troops fell. Uriah the Hittite was among those who died. And then after he dies, when Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. After the period of mourning was over, David sent and had her brought into his palace. She became his wife, and she bore him a son. And then Nathan says to David, and I'm just going to read this. This again is 2 Samuel 12. Why have you flouted the command of the Lord and done what displeases him? You have put Uriah the Hittite to the sword. You took his wife and made her your wife and had him killed by the sword of the Ammonites. Therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you spurned me. You spurned me by taking the wife of Uriah the Hittite and making her your wife. Thus said the Lord, I will make a calamity rise against you from within your own house. I will take your wives and give them to another man before your very eyes, and he shall sleep with your wives under this very sun. You acted in secret, but I will make all of this happen in the sight of all Israel and in broad daylight. And let me just say that this sword that is now going to afflict David, his own home life is forever after ruined. Amnon, his son, rapes his daughter Tamar. Absalom then kills Amnon. Then Absalom rebels. His son rebels against his father, and Absalom, the son, is killed. And it's nothing but pain and brokenness after this. So King David, who commits murder, adultery, and violation of trust, and who is specifically punished, and his whole family life is a hot mess, for him to say, I was blameless before the Lord, doesn't cut it, and Abarbanel doesn't cut it.
Okay,
so now address that, Elias.
I know you have very strong opinions about
Elias,
this.
address that.
So, two different possibilities. Suppose that Abarbanel is right. Okay, suppose that Abarbanel is right, and David wrote this in his youth. People change, and we know so well how especially people change when they are in power. All right, power gives unlimitless, rights. People think. Okay,
right.
It's not the first, not the last one. The king or presidents who think that they can do whatever they want because they are in power.
Right.
All right. So that is one theory. Suppose that the second theory is right, that he wrote that after the episode of Batsheba.
Right.
Again, go back to the same thing. How many people think that what they are doing is completely right? And as a king, he can do whatever he wants. He can take the wife. He can kill this guy who is a nobody. I'm not justifying.
Right.
I'm trying to understand the mindset of somebody who lived 3,000 years ago. Now, that being said, I think you and I are in opposite, sides here, because to me, I've said this many times, I love King David as a whole with the horrible things that he's done, because of the fact that I believe that I'm here singing in a synagogue because of the culture that he created with the musical instruments in the temple, and succeed with Asaph, and King Solomon and all the musical instruments and all the beauty that is written in the Psalms. Okay?
Right.
So
Okay.
that being said, I'm not denying the horrible things that he did. But look at what we discussed last week. We were talking about Eliyahu Nabi. He butchers, he slays all the worshippers of Baal, and now we consider him the Mashiach. So it's like, we have so many characters that are like that in the Bible.
R-
So I don't think, honestly, that David is any different.
And Eliza, I want to push back a little bit about what you said at the beginning, about the fact that you find that this Haftarah gives you, a hope that that the merits that you put forth in your life come back to you towards the end of your life. It seems like it happened with King David. What he did gets pushed on to the generations afterwards. But I'm not sure that I believe that. I think that sometimes you can live a perfectly beautiful life, and as you get older, your life may not be easy. It may not be beautiful. It may have strained familial relations. It may have strained professional relations. All of that, can happen. So I want to just push back on your original
No, you're
comment.
absolutely right. But
Yeah.
you also know well that when you read inspiring words where you are in the middle of a challenge, hope is the last thing that you lose. You keep fighting, and this gives you more hope. And then one more thing, Wes, that it sometimes it's very strange how things happen and what the results are. And we talk about this horrible, fight among some of the sons of King David, and whole
Rape, murder, that
exactly,
kind of thing.
horrendous.
Yes.
But then how do you explain that from that horrible act that he did, Batsheba becomes his wife, and he has kids with her, and he has especially King Solomon, who is the builder of the Jerusalem temple. And then, as you know, we all go to Jerusalem. The first thing we want to do is to be in the Kotel, and then that was from the second temple, the wall surrounding the second temple. But it all originated in Solomon and in Bathsheba with a horrible thing with David. So it's very complicated, the whole thing.
Yeah. So, Elias, let me inquire about your thinking. What I hear you saying is that, yeah, he did it. He did murder. He did adultery. He violated trust. That's true. But maybe he wrote this beforehand, or maybe he wrote it afterwards. Let's look at either of those. And what I want to ask you about in both cases is, what is the lesson learned? And I'd like you to think about, because you're such a dedicated father, ask yourself, what is the kind of lesson you want to teach Mikey? And what's the kind of lesson you want to teach David? And what's the kind of lesson you want to teach all of our children and all of our adults of all generations from this? Because one thing that I hear you saying, and I don't know if this is the lesson you intend to say, but that if somebody is really super talented, super musical, super charismatic, create gorgeous song and teach gorgeous song, then they can get away with all kinds of other moral violations, and they can even lie about it because of their overwhelming talent. And that's a read of this that I find so disturbing. We live in a season, obviously, that powerful people lie, and by lying, and by repeating the lies, and by denouncing the people who try to present the truth, that they get away with it. They get away with it, which means that truth itself is a casualty. And we know that that the seal of God is truth. And so I number one, I worry a lot about the very notion of truth with this reading, because it seems to suggest that because King David was such a talented musician, okay, we'll let the murder, adultery, and violation of trust pass. So here's my question. Again, thinking about your kids and our kids. Let's go with the first, the Barbanel, that he wrote this as a youth, and then this happened later. Let me ask you this question. Imagine there's a very talented cantor at a congregation who's at the congregation for 40 years. And for the first 38, 39 years is a model citizen. And then the last 2 years starts sleeping around and sleeps with congregants and does horrible things. And then it comes out. Okay, what is going to be that cantor's, lasting legacy at that synagogue? Are people going to say, amazing 38 years, the 2 years he was sleeping around, violating some trust, sleeping with widows whose husbands he buried, not his finest day, but it's okay, look at the music? Or in our world today, would somebody say, this person is, I can't accept this. So what's the lesson?
Okay, first of all, I have to start by defending myself because
I didn't say it was you.
no, you were saying about that I will justify whoever does whatever horrible things because he's talented musically. No, I never meant to say that. Okay, never meant to say that. For example, I know that Richard Wagner is a fabulous opera composer, beautiful music. I don't listen to Wagner because he was a horrible person. And he was horrible to the Jews, and he was the creator of some books and some papers that Hitler got inspired by. I don't listen to his music, period. Very talented. Second, you know for a fact that during many years, we used to sing very often, every Friday night, a lot of melodies of Rabbi Shlomo Karlebach. His melodies are gorgeous, gorgeous. Think about, Mizmor LeDavid, Shiro LeAdonai, everyone. It has something that gets into your soul. And then, on the other hand, he had so many accusations of, molesting and rape and all that things. So we barely sing any of his music. All right. So I cannot. It's not that I overseen that for the time.
Right.
All right. So I needed to defend myself with that. But that being said, and second, it's not. Those are not values that I'm going to teach to my kids. All right. Cheating and killing people because you want to cover up something. All right.
Right.
But we have to make a note that this happened 3,000 years ago, my friend. And you know that in those days, leaders had many wives, 4, 5, 6 wives, and unfortunately, the role of women in those days was very passive. They couldn't do much. If the king wants you, that's it. So I'm not justifying that, but I cannot oversee the fact that all what he brought to the culture, the Jewish culture, in other parts of his life, the Psalms, the music, whatever, why? I wasn't the person who decided to include his in twice in a year or all the Psalms in the Siddur that we have.
Right.
Right. So it's very complex.
Yeah.
And so let me finish with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, that if I look with the eyes of somebody who lives in the 21st century, no, completely no. This is a no. We should, cross him out, and that's it. But, this is what the legacy of Jewish people is. We have these figures, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, He's one of the big 5, big 6.
Right. So here's what I want to say, and then Dan, I want to bring you into this, but I want to offer a third alternative, right? So one choice is that we canceled King David and don't read his Psalms. I'm not advocating for that. I'm not saying because of Uriah, Batsheba, and etc. that we stop doing David. I'm not saying that, right? That's one bad option. Second bad option is Psalm 22. The second bad option is the Haftarah. I hate this Haftarah, and I hate that our kids. Well, if our kids were in shul and were reading it, I would hate the lesson they would learn from it. I would hate the lesson that our adults would learn from it. And in part, I hate it so much because it mirrors the image that we're getting in culture today in America, particularly political culture. That if you do bad things, the answer is you lie about it, lie and deny, lie and deny, lie and deny, and accuse people who are trying to bring out the truth of conducting witch hunts, and it's their fault, it's not your fault, you're blameless, it's their fault. And if you do that loudly enough and long enough, you can get away with it. That's our culture. And then to have a Haftarah that channels that message, I find utterly deplorable. So I am not a fan of this Haftarah. But let me just offer a third alternative. Here's the third alternative. Between canceling David, bad idea, whitewashing David, which is what he does and what the Haftorah does. Bad idea. What about this lesson? And this is a lesson I would love to teach our kids. This is a lesson I would love to teach our adults. This is a lesson that I would love to live by myself. To be a human is to do things we regret. Nobody lives and does stuff that they don't regret. We all make mistakes. We all make stupid mistakes. We all do things that are not worthy of who we are and who we want to be. And in that case, instead of whitewashing and denying, which is the lesson you get when you read the newspapers, what about doing the Jewish response, which is to acknowledge it, to apologize for it, and to try to make amends for it? So I want to just offer this alternative.
One thing,
yes.
before we go quickly to that. So if we take the second one, that you say, this is not the message I want to teach to the kids. I agree with you. But where do you draw the line? Because every Shabbat, when we end, Eliyahu Anavi, the one who butchered all these people in Baal, all right, because praising God. We praise so much, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Isaac, Elohei Yaakov, Yaakov cheats on his blind father, stealing with the arm and stealing the thing from Esav.
So Elias, I love that point. The answer is very simple. The answer is you don't deny it. We read every year in Genesis, we read that Jacob does what he does and then suffers for it, and we talk about it. Elijah, the Shabbat Haggadah, my whole class with us that week, and then in Talmud class live, was about what he did, butchering the false prophets of Baal. And we don't whitewash, we don't deny, we don't say he's blameless and perfect. We don't say that Jacob is blameless and perfect. We say they're not blameless, they're not perfect. By the way, which makes them accessible role models because we're not blameless and we're not perfect. What did Jacob do here? Not good. What do we learn from it? What did Elijah do here? Not good. What do we learn from it? And by having an honest conversation, we can grow. What I find so objectionable about this horrible Haftorah is the lie, the whitewash, where by denying that he did anything bad, we can't learn from it. And it reinforces the message, because everybody who reads this Haftorah, everybody who's biblically literate, knows it's a lie. And therefore, the message, the unintended or intended message is, if you whitewash and lie and deny and say, I'm blameless, I'm perfect, you get away with anything. And I just think that's a nefarious message. So here is an alternative, which is, this is on page 11 of the handout. It's actually, and I wanted to take the most sacred moment, which is, if you think about saying goodbye to a person who you love, who's in their last pages of their book, the traditional vidui, the atonement, is, I'll just read this. Adonai, my God and God of my ancestors, I acknowledge that my life is in your hands. May it be your will to heal me fully. But if death is imminent, may I accept it gracefully, and may my death serve as atonement for all the sins for which I have been responsible before you. Utehi mitati kapara al kol chataim shechatati lefanecha. In other words, our most sacred ritual, our most sacred text, at our most sacred moment, acknowledges all the sins that I committed before you. And let's say somebody is too sick to be able to say that, and the loved ones say this vidui for them. They say, may my loved one's death serve as atonement for all the wrongdoings for which they have been responsible. That you're praying for them, that your loved one did sins, may their death be an atonement for it. So we acknowledge and we seek repair and redress. And I just think that is such a better and healthier message. And that message is destroyed, cracked, broken by this Haftorah.
But just before, David does that in a tiny way, just before Nathan chastises him and says, by the way, your life is going to be a hot mess from now on. David says, oh, I'm so sorry. I know I did all these wrong things.
Thank you. Yeah, yes. and that is...
It's one sentence, but it does, but maybe...
But that's it, Wes, a question for you.
Yeah.
Exactly what Dan just said, the Batsheba was pregnant and the baby gets, killed because of the sin of King David. All right.
Right.
So, do you feel more at peace that that is part of the story as well?
Well, it's because this
I think
line,
that's horrible, actually.
Vayomer David el Natan, Chatati Ladonai. David said to Nathan, I stand guilty before the Lord. So, at least contrary to leaders today who don't accept any responsibility for their many moral failings, David takes responsibility for his moral failing. And that is lovely, but that is one verse. And you have to be a Bible scholar to know it.
But Wes,
if you're
one
a
more
shul
thing,
Jew,
I know-
if you're a shul Jew and you're in shul this Shabbos, you don't get the I stand guilty before the Lord.
Yeah.
What
Sorry
you
to
get is
defend-
I am blameless.
Sorry to defend David again, but every day when we can, because of the Jewish calendar, we recite Tachanun. And the Tachanun starts with Vayomer David el Gad, Tsar li miod, Chatati lefanecha. All
Right.
right?
Yeah, good point.
So he's repentant also in other parts of the story,
Right.
in
But
front of God.
Right.
So this is not the only time that he's repentant.
Right. Although, and this is kind of nerdy based
but-
inside
but-
baseball, that's for a very technical sin where he counts people that he shouldn't be counting. There's like the superstition against counting, and he counted them. He doesn't. There's no other reference. But what people think about David's moral life gone astray, they don't think about that he counted wrong when he shouldn't have counted. They think about sex and murder and violation of trust, and he just doesn't take responsibility for it, and it's lost in our ritual
He
life.
gets punished.
He gets punished, and all the rape and the murder and the internecine warfare, and his son rebels against him, and his brother kills his other son, and the other son, Adonijah, rebels against him. His life is a hot mess, which is why it's just so curious that I could imagine a Haftarah that would have been very different, which is, God, I've tried, but I'm mortal. And I've done some beautiful things, and the music is beautiful, and I've done my best to be a good king. And I did have a day when I faced Goliath. And, oh my God, I made a mess of my life, and I made a mess of my family's life.
So
And I
as
stand
a
before-
a
right.
Bible figure, you would
Right.
have loved to see that.
I would have loved to see it because it's a better message for us and for our kids. So as I wrap up this session, you come to shul on the seventh day of Pesach, and you read about the miracle of the splitting of the sea, and you read about Moses' words of adoration. God, thank you for splitting the sea. Love that. And I love the impulse of looking at our life and seeing where things worked out, where we were in a tough place and we called out to God and we experienced what happened next as God's salvation. Love that. What I find deeply troubling is the middle part of that hymn where he claims that all the good stuff that happened because he earned it, because he deserved it, because he was blameless and perfect, when we all know that he wasn't. And I would say, to me, the lesson I want to leave everyone with is, can we still call out to God? That's good. Can we still see the good things in our life as flowing from God? That's good. Those are Jewishly authentic. But can we be honest with ourselves and our loved ones and our God and acknowledge the frailty of being a human, which means we mess up? And when we mess up, instead of deny, and claim that it's a lie that we messed up, say, I did it, and I'm sorry, and take responsibility. That makes for a better life, and therefore it would have made for a better Haftarah. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom.
Shalom, Chag Sameach.